Good morning again, everybody. My name is Jason Wimmer. I'm the Director of State and Federal Grants for the Governor's Crime Commission. So in this session, we call this our plenary session. We will share information on the management and documentation you're going to need for your grant. The grant award workshop is going to focus on everything post-award. And so your primary contact post-award is your grants administrators. Our grants administrators are responsible for processing our reimbursements. They'll also be working with you on any budget adjustments, monitoring, and technical assistance, and they'll be providing prior approval for your expenditures. They are also going to be your go-to for any policy and technical questions. So one area that GMs will be supporting you is with processing and receiving your reimbursements. First, for completing reimbursements, you need to understand your budget that was created within your grant application, and you need to have a good understanding of it. You're going to be completing your reimbursements for actual expenditures during 1-month periods using the approved line items that you created from the budget. We require all grants when submitting a reimbursement to use the GCC summary pages for each expense category. These documents will be uploaded using the reimbursement checklist found on the GCC website and uploaded to the Enterprise Business Services website or portal. You can find instructions for using the EBS portal on this link that we have provided here. And again, we do have a connection to all of our slide decks within the Power DMS site that Caroline had showed you a few minutes ago. We need you to order the supporting documentation included in your reimbursement in a particular way to assist our grants managers in processing. We ask that you try when possible to scan portrait style. This will allow the view from the grant manager side to be much more consistent. The expense cover sheet should be labeled as personnel A1, supplies as B1, equipment is C1, and so on. All supporting documents will be included within each category behind the cover sheet to form the expense category reimbursement packet. The supporting documents should be labeled with the category identifier and the page number. For example, the supporting documents under personnel can be cover sheet A1, timesheet A2, payroll register A3, and proof of payment A4. This is going to allow your grant administrator to quickly locate the items within those packets. And when you upload the packets to EBS, you will upload each expense category separately. So there will be one for personnel, one for supplies, one for contractual, one for travel and equipment, and so on. We ask that you use the requested nomenclature also when uploading each packet. The category of expenses followed by the month and year. Please remember to make sure to scan again, portrait style, and upload in PDF format. Reimbursements are due the last day of the month for actual expenditures that are made during the previous month. So if it's September 30th, 2025, your August monthly reimbursement is due. If you submit on time in EBS, our grant administrators have a goal to process the reimbursement, meaning to approve, deny, or send back for modification within 10 days. If you are late, the grant administrator has 30 days from the time you submit to process the reimbursement. Keep in mind, final reimbursements are due 60 days after the period of performance is complete. You may submit these early if you'd like, and we do ask if you are able to go ahead and submit them early. Any reimbursements in status of in process by a recipient are not considered submitted and may be rejected if not properly received by the end of the 60-day submission window. I want to make you aware of some continued changes due to the reduction of funding that we have been seeing and anticipated and have implemented some things. One is your final reimbursement for the year is due 60 days after the end of each program year. The remaining funds after this period will be swept and returned to GCC. No remaining funds will be carried over from one year to the next, except if you have certain JJ grants. This will allow GCC to keep better track of the funds and better utilize these funds with our subrecipients. The final reimbursement for each year must be marked as final in EBS. This is going to alert the grant manager to move to the next year or close the grant. The grant administrator will change your grant from one year to the next, so from year 1 to year 2, and or close the grant at your request once all documents are met at the end of the period of performance. Proper documentation does keep us from having audit findings and having you to have to repay any federal funds. We really want to do everything we can to make sure that we never have to be in a situation where we're asking you to repay federal funds. GCC must have adequate documentation for all expenses, and this includes proof of payment in the form of a bank statement or a bank canceled check. In your final year, your final change requests are required to be made 90 days from the period of performance without an approved justification. At this point, I want to invite Roxana Zalata-Lewis to share more information on change requests.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning. I'm Roxana Zalata-Lewis, a Grants Management Supervisor, and I will be covering two areas today. The first will be change requests, followed by personnel and employee data. There are two types of change requests, also known as adjustment and notification. The non-budgetary change request is used for proposed changes to the originally approved grant agreement, such as an extension to the period of performance, changes to the scope of work. These changes include adjustments to the project's abstract narrative and changes to goals and objectives. Scope changes require prior approval from the planning team and your grant administrator. Personal updates and changes, change requests. These are changes to staff working on the project, new hires or replacement staff. Officials updates are changes to the agency's authorizing official, project director, and financial officer. For this type of changes, a copy of the board of directors, the board minutes approving the appointment of the new official are required. All these changes requests are submitted through EBS. Budget changes. These are changes to the originally approved budget and can be made to reallocate funds between existing line items, increase funds to existing line items, to add new line items and new budget categories not previously included in the existing budget, such as adding a travel category to a budget that did not have one in the originally approved budget, and to move funds between different budget categories, such as moving funds from personnel to supplies. Budgetary changes. Please remember, budget change requests are due 90 days before the end of the period of performance of your grant agreement. A justification must be included with your change request for EBS to accept the transaction. If you have section questions or have concerns, discuss the budget change request with your grant administrator to ensure allocation and expenses are allowed. Budget changes are not retroactively applied. Make sure you discuss any changes in your budget that may have questionable costs with your grant administrator beforehand. If you are submitted a budget change to increase salaries, the approved board minutes are required and must be uploaded to EBS. Remember that salary increases must be approved by the organization's board of directors for the entire staff in your organization and not only for grant-funded positions. Change request cap rule, 10% rule. For grant awards of $250,000 or more, budget changes are capped at 10% of the total award, meaning that transfers between direct cost categories, programs, and activities cannot exceed 10% of the total approved budget. Any changes to match funds require a budget change request. However, changes to match are not counted towards the 10% cap. There is no limit on the number of budget change requests that can be submitted to GCC during the life of the grant agreement, with exception of the last quarter of the grant agreement, meaning that 90 days before the grant ends. Once you have been allowed to reallocate 10% of the total grant award, any other changes to the budget will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis for approval or denial. Also, additional funds are approved to increase the total amount of the grant award. Budget change request will need to be submitted to increase the project budget. The 10% cap will be increased to include the additional funds. Budget change requests will be denied for the following reasons. The adjustment exceeds 10% of the total grant award. It is inconsistent with the grant's purposes and objectives. The costs are unallowable. It does not support or further the program. A denial will occur due to supplanting. Supplanting is when federal funds are used to pay for services rendered. Staff position, programs, or materials are usually paid by or with state or other local funds. Lastly, budget adjustments can be submitted 90 days before the end of the period of performance without justification. After 90 days, your grants administrator with reasonable justification can approve the budget change request on a case-by-case basis. Now we'll move on to personnel and employee benefits. What are personnel and employee benefits? This consists of items such as salary, paid leave, FICA, Medicare and Social Security, healthcare benefits such as hospitalization, vision and dental, retirement, and workers' compensation. Now let's look at the required supporting documentation for personnel or payroll and fringe benefits reimbursement. The first required document is the employee's pay stub. The required elements for the pay stub are the employee's legal name, gross wages, total work hours, hourly rate of pay or monthly salary, the pay period start and end days, the pay date, as well as all deductions for taxes and benefits and retirement. Here you will see a sample of a pay stub containing the required items previously mentioned. The pay stub can also contain benefits paid by the employer. If the employer paid pay benefits are not listed on the pay stub, additional supporting documentation is required for reimbursements for paid fringe benefits. The additional supporting documentation will include the provider's billing statement for the reimbursement period containing the coverage period, cover employees with type of coverage and employee costs, and total amount due. Proof of total payment for the provider is also required, as well as benefits allocation sheets for agencies with multiple funding sources. Please note that GCC reimburses only for employees' fringe benefits. Costs related to dependents, family members, or spouses are not allowable. Next, we will discuss the time and activity sheet. There are two types of time and activity sheets, the single funding source timesheet and the multiple funding source timesheet. The personnel requirement for your organization and GCC grant agreement will determine the appropriate time and activity sheet that applies to each employee listed on your grant agreement. The GCC time and activity sheets are required for all staff charging to the grant agreement and for volunteers. Time and activity sheets are required as part of the supporting documentation to receive reimbursement for personnel expenses. The GCC time and activity sheets must be signed and dated by the employee and the employee's supervisor. The executive director's time and activity sheet must be signed by the board chair or an authorized board member. Ensure that you're utilizing the latest time and activity sheet version. They can be downloaded from the GCC website and from the new site that Caroline just showed us earlier in the workshop. Here is a sample of the single funding source timesheet that will be used for employees that are working 100% of their time on a single project, or by volunteers contributing time for cash match to one funding source. Next, we have the multiple funding source timesheet. This is required for employees splitting their time, working time between two or more funding sources or projects, and whose salary is paid by more than one funding source. For example, an executive director or project director managing multiple grant awards, or an advocate working on multiple grant awards. The timesheet must contain all hours worked during the reimbursement period from all funding sources. A few things to note about the timesheets are: all fields requested in the timesheet are required and must be completed for reimbursement. The employee's legal name is required on all documents, and the employee's name must match the name on the pay stub. The employee's name and position and job title on the timesheet must correspond to the information submitted on the supporting documentation and EBS. Most importantly, the time and activity sheet must be signed by the employee and the supervisor with first-hand knowledge of the work performed. Wet ink signatures are required, however, electronic and digital signatures are permitted. The personnel cover page must be submitted with personnel and employee benefits reimbursement request. Instructions for completing the personnel cover page are located at the bottom of the form, which is the second page. Use the official GCC cover sheets. Any alterations to or removal of the department and suspension attestation on any of the cover sheets is not permitted. A personnel cover sheet is required with all reimbursement requests. Each employee listed on the personnel cover sheet represents a personnel budget line item on your budget. The total sum of the employer paid fringe benefits, FICA, retirement, and hospitalization for the reimbursement period should be included on the cover sheet. So to finalize, if you have any questions or concerns on the items discussed, please contact your grants administrator. For the next section, I'll hand it over to Jennifer.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Johnston, and I am a GCC Grants Administrator. First, I will be presenting the supporting documentation for equipment. Supporting documentation for equipment must include receipts, invoices, or any other documentation supporting the purchase of the equipment. Copies of 3 bids from vendors are required when the equipment is $10,000 or more. A sole source provider form is necessary if there is only one provider who has the precise equipment you are trying to purchase. This form will have the justification on why you are choosing a sole source provider. Property tags are required for equipment purchased with grant funds and a value of $5,000 or more. The property control record and equipment certification form are required for all equipment purchased with grant funds, which need to be uploaded in EBS attachments. All of the above items should be accessible during the site visit and when submitting your reimbursements. This is the sole source provider request form. Please note if the purchase is more than $250,000, there must be a prior approval from the Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs. On this form, you must complete the agreement description and ID, implementing agency, authorizing agency, program director's name, email address, phone number, and proposed dollar amount of the purchase. Enter the contractor's name, check the reason for the request, and if other is selected, you must provide an explanation. Enter the submitted by and the date of the request. Your grants administrator will approve or deny your request. The form will then be uploaded to the agreement for future reference. Here are some examples of property tags that are required for all equipment. The equipment must have a unique number assigned to them, which is a way to keep track of the equipment purchased with GCC grant funds. This is the property control record and equipment certification form. The top section will have the authorizing agency, implementing agency, agreement description and ID, program director's name, and email address. The rest of the form has multiple sections for different equipment. This section contains the item description, serial number, asset number, purchase date, vendor name, cost, purchase by, insurance coverage, assigned to, equipment location, and the purpose of the equipment. The equipment cover sheet is required when submitting a reimbursement request. Agreement description, agreement ID, and the reporting period are required, preferably by the month when it was purchased. An example of the reporting period would be from October 1, 2025 to October 31, 2025. The document ID, which is the page number of the file you create, item purchased, vendor name, cost per item, total cost, then indicate the amount of the federal share and the match share accordingly. You can find additional instructions on the second page of the form. Please note that the threshold for the disposition of equipment has increased to $10,000. You may retain $1,000 to cover expenses associated with the selling and handling of the equipment. For special purpose equipment, the dollar amount requiring prior approval has increased to $10,000. Please see the CFR for more information. These updates went into effect on October 1st of 2024. We will now go over the supporting documentation for consultants and contractors. Pre-contract request forms and unexecuted contracts must be approved by the grant administrator. The executed contract must be submitted to the grant administrator for upload to EBS prior to requesting reimbursement. This is the pre-contract request form. Complete all the fields on this form: the agreement description, agreement ID, request date, agency name, individual name, hourly rate, rate per day not to exceed, the federal share to be reimbursed, the match share to be allocated, the grant period, description of the scope of work to be performed, program director's signature and date. The bottom part is to be completed by your grant administrator. All reimbursement requests must have a GCC cover sheet. When submitting the invoices for the consultant or contractor for reimbursement, the vendor's name, dates of service, hours worked, payment amount due for the services, and a list or description of the services delivered from the consultant or contractor must be clearly displayed. Keep in mind the capped amount is $81.25 per hour and is not to exceed $650 per day. Otherwise, a contract excess rate request form must be submitted along with the pre-contract request form, copy of the unexecuted contract, and resume, if applicable. A couple of notes on this is please remember that a new contract will be required for your new grants, and that contracts should not cross over to a new grant period. Reimbursements submitted must have the contractual cover sheet filled out with supporting documentation behind it, which should include the invoice and the proof of payment. Provide the agreement description, agreement ID, the reporting period, the document ID number, which is the page number where we can locate that supporting documentation, contractor's name and title, service hours, rate. The total cost will be the hours multiplied by the rate. Then fill out the portion for the federal share and the match share. Additional instructions are located on page 2 of the form. This is the contract excess rate request form. Required on this form are the agreement description and ID, request date, agency name, contractee or individual, requested hourly rate, rate per day not to exceed amount, federal share to be reimbursed, match share to be allocated, grant period, and rate justification. The project director would sign and date the form, and the bottom portion is to be completed by your grant administrator. Counselors, lawyers, software and hardware computer engineers, therapists, and grounds maintenance staff are all examples of consultants and contractors. Volunteers, board members, and employees do not qualify as consultants or contractors. I appreciate your attention for these slides. And next up, we have Tanya.
Good morning. My name's Tanya Ogburn. I'm a grants management supervisor with GCC. For the next few slides, I'm going to talk about supporting documentation needed for travel, supplies, and operating expenses. For travel, receipts are needed for any conference registrations along with the conference agenda or itinerary. Receipts are also needed for the hotel, the airline, taxi, or car rental. Meals and mileage per diem rates are based on your agency's travel policy. If your agency does not have a travel policy regarding per diem rates, then the state's per diem rates should be used. If you're using your agency's travel policy, the agency's travel per diem rates should not exceed the state's per diem rates. A mileage travel log form should be submitted as supporting documentation for any employee's mileage reimbursements. Out-of-state travel requires prior approval by your grants administrator. Out-of-state travel may have already been approved in your budget, but remember, the budget is projected, plans change, and therefore prior approval is required. Also remember that a budget modification does not provide prior approval. This is the prior approval request form that must be completed with all the necessary details about the out-of-state travel. Please provide your grants administrator with the name of the conference, the date of the conference, an agenda or website with the conference information, budgeted cost, and all attendees at least 90 days prior to the travel. The travel cover sheet must be submitted with all supporting documentation and receipts after the travel has taken place. Please note that the per diem websites are at the bottom of the travel cover sheet for you to use if your agency does not have a per diem policy in place. You can refer to instructions at the bottom of the form for direction on how to fill out the form completely. You should also send in the approved out-of-state prior approval form, if applicable, with the supporting documentation for that reimbursement. Now we're going to talk about the supporting documentation needed for supplies and operating expenses. I cannot stress the importance of having receipts and invoices when submitting your reimbursement. These receipts and invoices are needed for any expenses when you submit for reimbursement. Vendor invoices include utility bills, invoices, and/or receipts for rent, or a copy of the lease should also be loaded into the attachments in EBS, and you also need proof of payment. Proof of payment may be a receipt showing it was paid with cash, or charge card, or canceled check, not a copy of a check, or a bank statement showing check clearance. If you paid with a charge card, for instance, like Visa, we still need the bank statement showing the charge card has been paid for that month. Receipts and invoices must show the vendor's name, date of service, purchase, the amount due, and list of what services were performed or what was purchased. There are 3 methods to divide up expenses from receipts between different grants. Make separate purchases for each grant and get a separate receipt for each grant, and this is the preferred method. Or you can make a combined purchase, attach the documentation explaining what items were purchased for each grant. Remember to submit a copy of the receipt for each grant. You can write the grant number beside each item on the receipt. Also, if making a combined purchase, make a copy of the receipt for each grant, highlighting the items on the receipt, showing which items were charged to that particular grant. Submit copies of the documentation with all grant and reimbursement claims. Here's a sample of an invoice that shows the date entered for payment. The invoice has the name of the company providing the service, the date, and the amount of the invoice, and it's stamped with the date it was entered for payment. Here are forms of proof of payments that I had mentioned earlier. Cleared or canceled check with the endorsement side of the check. A clear check are usually available as a scanned image from your online bank account. A credit card or bank statement, which should contain the cardholder's address, the summary of account information, which would be like the payment due, the balance, and all other details relevant to the transaction being requested for reimbursement. Here we continue with forms of proof of payment. Bank statement showing the expense, cleared canceled check, an invoice showing balance paid, and receipt showing the expense was paid. A receipt is any document that contains the following 5 IRS required elements. We have the name of the vendor, the transaction date, the detailed description of goods or services purchased, the amount paid, and the form of payment. Here's an example of proof of payment. This is a check produced by Intuit Payroll. The bank statement should be submitted showing that the check paid cleared the bank. This is a check showing it was direct deposited into an employee's account. The bank statement should be submitted showing that the check paid to the payroll processing company also cleared the bank. This is a canceled check with a stamp on the back with the bank's endorsement and the date it cleared the bank. There are two types of supplies. We have office supplies, which are equipment, cost under $5,000, and project-specific office supplies. We also have program supplies. These are materials and other goods supplied for the execution of the program. Make sure you always include the supply cover sheet when you submit your reimbursement. You can refer to the instructions at the bottom of the form for direction on how to fill the form out completely. For operating expenses, we have the normal costs for operating your agency. Some of these may include your rent, not a mortgage, your payroll cost, the insurance cost, utility expenses, and cleaning services. These may also include lease agreements. This is the operating expenses cover sheet. Please make sure you include this with your supporting documentation, and instructions are at the bottom of the sheet. Now I'll turn this over to Mr. Spinks. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Burley Spinks, a grants administrator, and I will be talking to you about match and reporting. Any funder may require that a grantee, which is match, some portion of the funds that they provide. But what is match? Match is a portion of the costs not paid by the federal government. When a federal grant requires the grantee to match funds, there are restrictions and regulations that govern what can be counted as match and how these funds may be documented. Additionally, grant agreements specify what sources of match funds can be used and which type of match funds are allowed. Simply stated, match is the amount of funds that grantees are required to contribute to accomplish their purpose of their project. These match funds are subject to the same rules that govern federal funds, which means that the cost is not allowable under the federal award is not allowable as match. Match is usually described as a percentage of the total amount of the project. As you can see on the example, a 20% of match of a $100,000 project would be $20,000. So to determine your match amount, take the total amount of your award and multiply it by the match percentage required by the funder. There are two types of match: a cash match, also known as a hard match, and an in-kind match, also known as a soft match. Federal grants typically require that match contributions come from a non-federal source. Cash match is the most common type of match, and as stated on the slide, is either the grantee's own funds or general revenue, or cash donations from non-federal third parties or non-federal grants. In simple terms, cash match is an actual cash contribution to the project, such as the cash expenditures of costs related to the project, or project-related staff salaries, consultant fees, equipment rentals, and travel costs. This slide lists the budget categories that can be used on the budget for cash match. Keep in mind that if your project does not meet the committed match funds, your agency may be required to refund a portion of the federal funds paid. Note that match is listed as a lump sum amount on your approved budget on EBS. In-kind refers to resources besides money. An in-kind match are contributions or donations that come from the grantee agency or by non-federal third parties in the form of the values of personnel, goods, and services, including direct and indirect costs. As described in the slide, in-kind match or non-cash contributions, such as a volunteer time or donation of goods and service directly benefiting the project, including donated equipment, space, and utilities. For donations of goods, make sure the items are used to further the project's goals and objectives. Make sure to use fair market value to determine the allowable cost of the in-kind contribution. People sometimes volunteer to help your organization. When using volunteers' time as an in-kind match, volunteer services must be documented and supported by using the same methods used to document employees' time and attendance records. Time and activity sheets must be signed by an authorizing official and include a description of the work performed directly benefiting the project. Hourly rates for volunteer services should be consistent with hourly rates paid to regular staff performing the same work. If no comparison is possible, then rates should be consistent with those paid for similar work in the labor market. Make sure that your match contributions are verifiable on your records and are necessary and reasonable to achieve your project's goals and objectives. Make sure that your match contributions are not included as contributions for any other federally assisted project and are not paid by the federal government under another grant. In simple terms, time or resources spent on one project should only be counted as match for a single project. Make sure your match costs are allowable and approved in the project's budget. Make sure all match adheres to the requirements in 2 CFR 20, Subpart D. Match contributions are subject to the same rules and the same support and documentation as any other expenditure made within the project's funds, as discussed earlier in the presentation. And although matching contributions can be applied at the end of the program year, your agency must consider how waiting to submit match until the end of the year will impact the utilization rate throughout the program year. The fund match share must be contributed by the end of the award period. For in-kind match contributions, make sure to document these areas. Who is the source? Make sure that your agency can demonstrate that contribution is from an acceptable donor source. What was donated? Make sure that your agency can demonstrate that what is being used as match is suitable for match. Be specific and show how it relates to your project's goals and objectives. How was the value determined? The donor should generally determine the value, and it should be based on standard objective resources rather than best guesses. Who verified the information? Who certified that the information is correct? Is there a responsible party who is prepared to sign that the information is true and correct? All these requirements are especially important for audit purposes. And again, make sure all your match adhere to requirements in 2 CFR 200 Subpart D. At the end of the program year, any remaining funds will be reverted to GCC minus the match funds. To conclude, it is very important that you keep records that clearly show the source, amount, and timing of your match contributions, and that the full match share is met at the end of your project. For any questions regarding match funds, please contact your grants administrator. Reporting. Timely reporting is critical to GCC's continued funding. Therefore, we need you as the subrecipient to complete your reports to us and other federal agencies in an accurate and timely fashion. Please be aware, sanctions will be imposed on subrecipients who do not support reports in a timely manner. Listed are required reports and due dates for all subrecipients. Please note, the notice of grant implementation and initial sub-grant award report are due immediately after your grant is open. Again, please note that the notice of grant implementation and the initial sub-grant award report are due immediately after your grant is open. Expense reimbursements are due monthly once the expense has been incurred. Please note that all GCC projects require an annual report and that your progress report should be aligned with the goals and objectives you stated in your grant application. Audit reporting. North Carolina state law requires every non-government entity that receives state or federal pass-through grant funds from a state agency to file annual reports on how these grant funds are used. CGS 143C-6-23, Administration Oversight and Reporting Requirements. Specific requirements for each funding level are as follows. Level 1 is for grants that are $1 to $999,999. The required documents needed in this certification form is the certification form and the state grants compliance reporting for receipts of less than $999,000. These forms and reporting must be submitted to the web address above. Level 2 are for grants of $100 million. The 3 forms needed and submitted to the first email in bold are the certification form, the state grants compliance reporting for receipts of $1 million and more, and program activities and accomplishments reports. Please pay attention that you must also submit to DPS internal audit at the second web address in bold within 9 months of the grantee's fiscal year end. A single audit prepared and completed in accordance with the General Accepted Government Auditing Standards. The second part of Level 3 is for grants of $100 million and more. These 3 forms needed and submitted to the first email in bold are the certification form, state grants compliance reporting for receipts of $25,000 or more, program activities and accomplishment reports. Also, please pay attention that you must also submit to DPS internal audit at the second web address in bold within 9 months of the grantee's fiscal year end, a single audit prepared and completed in accordance with the General Accepted Government Auditing Standards. Post the single audit to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse and submit to fac.gov. Please make sure you provide copies of the single audit and make them available to the public. Next, Roxana to continue with the next session.
Hello again. Today we'll be covering Part 200, 307 of the 2 CFR 200. It's program income. It's part of the Uniform Guidance, also known as 2 CFR 200. This section outlines how program income is defined, how it should be used, and the rules recipients must follow when managing federal grant funds. General overview is that program income is any money earned as a direct result of a federal award. Program income must be used strictly for the original purpose of the award. Importantly, something that's very important is that it must be spent during the performance period, not after the project ends, unless stated otherwise. Another key point is that recipients must spend this income before asking for more federal funds. If income goes beyond what's specified in the award, it can either be added to the project's budget or deducted from costs, depending on the terms and conditions of the award. There are 3 ways program income can be applied: by deduction, by addition, or by cost sharing. The federal agency will state which method applies in the award. If nothing is specified, the default method is deduction. However, for institutions of higher education and nonprofit research institutions, the addition method is the default. If a recipient wants to use either the addition or cost sharing methods when not specified, they must obtain prior approval from the agency, from the funding agency. Under the deduction method, program income simply reduces the total allowable cost of the project. That means that the overall federal award is effectively smaller. For example, if a program has $100,000 award and it generates $10,000 in program income, the recipient will only need $90,000 in federal funds. This is the most common method when no specific direction is given. The addition method is different. It increases the overall funding available for project activities. Using the same example, $100,000 award with $10,000 program income becomes a total budget of $110,000. This gives the program more resources but requires agency approval unless the award already specified this method. The cost sharing method allows program income to count toward the recipient's required match. For instance, if an award requires a $25,000 cost share and the program earns $10,000 in program income, that amount reduces the match requirement to $15,000. This can help recipients meet cost sharing requirements more easily. Sometimes generating income has its own cost, like event expenses or fees for producing materials. If authorized by the federal regulations or the award itself, this incidental cost may be deducted from the gross income to determine the program net income. But very importantly, this cost cannot already have been charged to the award. So meaning that if you already charge it to your award, you cannot utilize it for programming deductions. To summarize, program income must be used during the award period and for the award's purpose. The default method of applying it is deduction, but exception exists depending on the type of recipient. Always check your award terms and conditions carefully, since they may specify a different method or exceptions. For any questions or concerns regarding program income, contact your grants administrator. In one final note, GCC does not accept program income for VAWA grants. For the next section, I'll hand it over back to Jason. Thank you.
I just have some additional information I wanted to share with everybody. First off, a reminder, please use GCC's cover sheets and timesheets unless the grant administrator has approved a different cover sheet or timesheet. Do not alter or remove items from the GCC timesheets, such as the attestation that is included. Retroactive budget changes are considered on a case-by-case basis. These are not allowed if they involve adding new line items or positions to the budget. The grant management guidelines includes a section for outreach materials, public awareness items, program supplies, and trinkets. This is your guidance for subrecipients. You can find it on the Power DMS site. It is already uploaded there and has information as to what is allowable for you to be able to use. Also, GCC requests a copy of the subrecipient's general ledger with each reimbursement submission. Please ensure you submit a reconciled general ledger accompanying the 6th reimbursement request within the active budget year of the grant agreement, a reconciled general ledger accompanying the final reimbursement request within the active budget year of the grant agreement. These two are important and key as we do want to make sure that we receive them at those two intervals. There are additional cybersecurity requirements that have been added to 2 CFR that we want to make you aware and develop a plan to ensure compliance. 2 CFR 200.303E adds reasonable cybersecurity internal control requirements to the information protection and internal controls. It requires that subrecipients take reasonable cybersecurity and other measures to safeguard the information, including protected personally identifiable information and other types of information. This also includes information for federal agency or pass-through entity designates as sensitive or other information the recipient or subrecipient considers sensitive and is consistent with applicable federal, state, local, and tribal laws regarding privacy and responsibility over confidentiality. We have listed here also some links to assist you in locating information that you may need while working with our grants very quickly. And for any of the forms that you heard discussed in the plenary session presentations that Tanya, Roxana, Jennifer, and Burley covered, you'll be able to find those on the GCC website. There is a place here called Grant Information that you can go to. And when you click on that, it'll take you to a link to the Power DMS site where you can find all of the forms listed. Also on this site, just wanted to point out, you'll be able to subscribe to all of GCC's publications. You'll be able to see our newsletter, and we have other publications that we have out there, even from our Criminal Justice Analysis Center. These can be helpful when you're applying for grants. It's also very interesting information, so I do encourage you to take a look at it. And like always, if you have any questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to contact your grants administrators. Our grants administrators will be working to try to find any answers to the questions that you may have. They're also your guide for EBS training, any other types of things that you can think of that come up that you have a question about. They're here to help provide technical assistance and guide you through the process from the award to the close of the grant. We really appreciate your attention to this presentation. I wanted to let everybody know that we are recording the presentations and they will be posted to our website. It normally takes about a day or two for the recordings to come down and for us to be able to get them and get everything posted up to the website. So you'll be able to see them there once we get them up there. And we'll take a 1-minute break as we sort of shuffle and move to the next presentation. Thanks, everybody.